Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hyperspace on Dark Matter Radio Network. I'm your host, Solaris Blue Raven. I want to thank everybody for tuning in this evening, and a special thank you to webmaster producer Keith Rowland. And my special guest this evening is James Bartley. James Bartley has investigated alien abductions, and particularly reptilian abductions and military abductions, for over 20 years. James is a protege of legendary alien abduction researcher Barbara Bartholic. James is an independent historian with an emphasis on intelligence, counterintelligence, and special operations. He is a student of military history from antiquity to modern times, and has made an in-depth study of the material, industrial, financial security complex, which developed after World War II. James personally investigated numerous reptilian abduction cases and military abduction cases in the high desert of Southern California. The high desert of Southern California is where the deep black aerospace industry is located, as well as military installations which figure prominently in UFO and MILAB research, such as Edwards Air Force Base and Naval Weapons Center, China Lake. He is familiar with much of the UFO military underground and undersea base activity in Southern California, Northern California, Arizona, and Nevada. And his website is the Universal Seduction. The universalseduction.com/Bartley. And please welcome James to the show this evening. And James, how you doing?
I'm doing fine, Solaris. Thanks for having me on here.
Well, my pleasure. It's great to have you on, and welcome aboard. And there's much to discuss tonight, so let's get started here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and I've got a lot of interesting information to share.
Excellent. Well, I don't know where you want to begin, but I know you did want to discuss a few things about various aspects of the alien encounter phenomenon and how serious UFO researchers today are making the same mistakes researchers made back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. So I wanted you to elaborate a little bit on that if you could.
Yes, and before I do, I'd like to talk a little bit about the craft of intelligence, how data is obtained and analyzed, correlated, and then disseminated to those who need the intelligence product. To use an example in the surface level intelligence world, there's three aspects to intelligence. Collection, you have to collect it through whatever means. Interpretation, one has to analyze the collected intelligence. And dissemination, it has to get the collected, interpreted intel has to be passed on to the users who can make something of it or utilize it in an operational sense. Now, the problem that we see oftentimes, intentionally oftentimes in the surface level intelligence world, is a problem known as cherry picking. And there's a direct parallel to this in UFO research and in activist research in general. And what cherry picking is it's an a priori bias, which holds that only certain types of information from certain pre-vetted sources of information, which usually fit into a predetermined agenda or mindset, are considered valid, hence the term cherry picking. This is why you see in the alien abduction field this anti-reptilian bias, right? Oh, the so-called serious researchers will talk day and night and endlessly about the grays. I call it the gray areas of UFO research. But they're dismissive about any suggestion of the existence of reptilian beings and or hybrid variants thereof. That's cherry picking. That's not taking into account the countless first-person accounts of people who've actually had face-to-face encounters with reptilian beings, using just the reptilians as one example. There has been a movement afoot for some time to create this generic kind of alien abduction syndrome wherein the only beings who seem to be real or have any validity in the research are the grays, right? And there's a reason for that. Cherry picking, and that's an important point to keep in mind because it ties into the mistakes, intentional, I believe, in many cases, that researchers made decades ago. Another aspect of intelligence collection, which is problematic in the surface world, is what's known as stovepiping. And what stovepiping is envision a number of stovepipes vertically positioned alongside of each other, but they are not plugged into a central collection point. They are each plugged into an independent intelligence collection, interpretation, dissemination stream. Now, the problem with stovepiping is you have people in their own predefined areas of expertise. And I've always been one who believes in the critical importance of having a panoramic, full-spectrum analysis approach to this subject matter, be it ancient mysteries, be it mysticism, be it reincarnation. All these facets will come into play in this interview we're going to have. So what you have with stovepiping is you have all these people with this predetermined mindset of what is valid intel to them, be it an intelligence analyst on the surface working for a given intelligence agency or a UFO researcher in our example. So these types of people, they tend to discount any suggestion that, like, for example, reptilian beings exist. They tend to discount any suggestion that beings who look perfectly human exist, underline perfectly human 3 times, because they don't look like us, we look like them. We are in the outer fringes of the galaxy. In Star Wars terms, we are on the outer rim. And it's clear to me and any people who've given this much thought that our life form and all life forms indeed on this planet were seated here. So when people say, oh, they look like us, well, that's a misnomer. We look like them. But the problem with some of these researchers is because of their own predetermined biases and a priori biases, they dismiss any suggestion at all that there are beings out there who look like us. They seem to believe that we're a one-off special or something, right? Mm-hmm. So that is stovepiping, and their intel, which they've collated, they've interpreted, is disseminated to their whole horde of acolytes and brethren with their own websites, with their own lecture circuits, et cetera, et cetera. So what you have is this miasma of seemingly contradictory streams of information, which contradict each other, which create endless opportunity for conflict, acrimony, et cetera, which is exactly it's designed to do. The UFO research community was never intended to be a harmonious, united effort. Now, we go back to the contactee era. And the contactee era, for those who don't know, is in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. A lot of people, not only in America, but all over the world, were having contacts with beings who look perfectly human. Perfect in the sense that their faces were perfectly symmetrical. There would be no blemishes, freckles, nothing that would mar their appearance. They were the products, it seemed to me, of a perfect understanding of genetics. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they may have blonde hair, sometimes they may have brown hair. Some of them could be of average or small stature. Some could be quite large. But generally, if you looked at them, they would be human, and they would alight out of craft. And oftentimes they would pick people up on a deserted highway or road somewhere, or on a camping trip, or sometimes even in their own homes. And these would not be abductions. These would be friendly meetings, and they would oftentimes show the contactee around and the interior of the craft and describe the different functions of the craft, navigation, propulsion, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And then they would return the contactees. And oftentimes, these contactees would have repeated encounters with these beings. To this day, there's a lot of controversy about George Adamski, but where there's smoke, there's fire. There's been many people who've seen the bell-shaped craft. Mm-hmm. A lot of the spin that goes out is that, oh, it's all Nazi, right? Mm-hmm. Well, not so fast, because these bell-shaped craft have been seen for long before the advent of the Nazis. The Nazis seem to be a catch-all phrase, a throwaway line like tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy researchers or, conspiratards, or whenever you want to be dismissive about someone, you just add tard at the end of it, right? Reptard, Eichtard. Mm. Well, the same thing with a lot of the contactees, because they've been dismissed by the so-called scientifically oriented researchers of the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Now, it's interesting who was doing most of the debunking. It was organizations like NICAP which had been taken over essentially by the CIA. Major Donald Kehoe, retired Marine major, was the founder of NICAP, and he was very upfront about the existence of alien craft in our skies, and he was relentlessly hammering the military, particularly the Air Force, for covering all this up. Then when he started taking the CIA to task for covering him up, that's when he really started getting harassed. And then his group, which he founded, NICAP, National Investigations Committee of Aerial Phenomena, was basically taken over. He was ousted, and then the whole board of directors of NICAP became a who's who of ex-quote-unquote intelligence people, some quite high-ranking. And because they were scientifically oriented, was their faux approach, they were all dismissive of this notion that beings from far away could look anything like us, especially when these beings, these human-looking beings, were telling the contactees we're from Venus, but it was always taken out of context. For example, Adamski was told, we're from Venus, but not the Venus that you know, we're from a higher plane. And other people were told the same thing, we're from a big base near Saturn. And now we know from space imagery that Iapetus, the Saturn, the moon, one of the moons of Saturn, is completely an artificial construct. The best place to go for this information is Richard Hoagland's Enterprise mission. The subpage is called A Moon with a View. And in two articles, Hoagland goes into detail, providing imagery analysis as well as text explaining why Iapetus cannot be a natural satellite, that the whole thing is artificial. Indeed, it looks very much like the Death Star of Star Wars, if one can believe that.
Right.
And so the long and the short of it is a lot of the things that the debunked so-called contactees were describing in the 40s, 50s, and 60s have been verified by space imagery. Some of the inner dynamics of the human-looking beings' culture and their technology has also been subsequently confirmed by whistleblowers, insiders, and leaks from the deep black aerospace community. For instance, what the contactees were saying was the truly advanced beings have organic technology. The craft themselves are organic in nature. They're grown in a chemical bath. As the craft develops, the different compartments and functions differentiate. Mm-hmm. So when the occupants say, well, I want a portal here, one will just appear.
Right.
And when occupants think, rather, because there's a cybernetic connection, that I want a hatch and a staircase to appear here, a hatch and a staircase appears. And much of the technology was also crystalline in nature. Well, we've been hearing from insiders within the aerospace community that some of the truly advanced beings indeed have what amounts to organic technology that is sentient in nature. Yes. That now we know that in mysticism on this planet, the Aborigines in Australia, Native North American, South American elders, the shamans in Siberia, et cetera, that they say that everything on this planet has a consciousness, whether it's a mineral, whether it's a plant, and whether it's an animal, et cetera, and that everything is connected, which physicists nowadays are just starting to just catch on to, right? Mm-hmm. And the point of relevance here is that these contactees were told decades ago, nigh on 60 years now, at least, that some of these craft have a consciousness. And let's just fast forward to the Myolab reports of today that I've received from people whom I trust implicitly. They say that as children, they were brought by the military and negative ETs working with the negative military and brought before a craft. A lot of them were brought before a certain craft. And oftentimes the craft wouldn't open. That's one of the problems that the deep black military and aerospace community have, is that they simply can't get into some of these craft, that they've been created by the manufacturers with built-in fail-safes, which only respond to the morphic blueprint resonance of someone with certain ET DNA. So when a child or an adult, whatever the case may be, is presented, put in front of one of these craft that has that correct morphic blueprint resonance of ET DNA, the craft opens up, the child walks into it, the interior lights up, the kid knows intuitively where to walk to get to the navigation control center. They sit down, everything lights up. It's like it's saying to the child, hello, old friend. It's nice to see you. We haven't seen you in quite many lifetimes, right? Because reincarnation plays into this, as well as the genetic seeding of a lot of the hybrids. Because in truth, we are all, to one degree or another, hybrids of not just one ET race, but a number of ET races in some people's cases. So here we are today, and the so-called serious researchers are making the same mistakes. They will buy into the grays and even some of the mantis beings and some of the other types of insectoid beings. Some of them may even be willing to admit that reptilians exist. But their minds balk when other types of beings, well, not just human-looking beings, but say human-looking beings that are like slightly blue in color, or human-looking beings that tell the percipient that you are descended from us, you used to be one of us in a past, or sometimes they're told even in a future incarnation, and you are of our resonance, and we are your guides, basically. Now we know that guides exist. One thing that the church in particular has done, and also lamestream dogmatic science, along with the New Age, because they played a role in muddying the waters, severely muddying the waters, is what the church and all its offshoots have done is told people, okay, you only live once. By the way, you're an original sinner, conceived in sin. Don't even think about going within for any kind of spiritual inspiration or guidance. You have to go through our priesthood, sinner. And then you're likely to wind up in purgatory or hell anyway, unless you do exactly what we tell you, because it's all fear-based control. All patriarchy, post this latest series of celestially driven cataclysms, patriarchy really took root afterwards. And they created all these priesthoods. They created alphabet writing, which shunted everyone into the left brain. Of course, the scribes were the ones who did the writing. The scribes were the ones that did the interpreting, and those laws got passed down, endlessly, generation after generation. So then you have the scientific side of that control mechanism, where everything is broken down into particles and subatomic particles, and now they're even making stuff up, the Higgs boson. Everything in mainstream science basically is made up. And their only proof is some long-ass equation on a blackboard, because mathematicians are running amok in the sciences these days, especially anything to do with astrophysics, et cetera, et cetera. The quantum physicists, so-called, are only now just scratching the surface of what mystics, yogis, and adepts have known for ages.
Agreed. Yeah, it's actually they're plagiarizing a lot of the technology and experience through that path.
Yes, they are, because what they're trying to do, they know, thank you for pointing that out, they know that they're starting to lose relevance. This is why NASA pops up every once in a while with some faux kind of breakthrough revelation, which doesn't really amount to anything. Because, again, it ties into this whole concept of separation, isolation, disempowerment, essentially, that everything has to be broken down into a particle. There's no connection anywhere. This is despite what common sense, it's counterintuitive what they say. And then you have the New Age la-di-das, right, who are always spewing out all these metaphysical channelings-oriented metaphysical pablum, right? There's no such thing as negativity. There's no such thing as negative beings. It's your own inner shadow. And there are people out there who have the gall to charge several $100s for their lousy workshops. And then after hours and hours, maybe 2 days, the message at the end is, oh, by the way, there's nothing negative in the cosmos and the multiverse. You're the only ones that are negative. It's your inner shadow that you haven't worked through, right? And they charge an arm and a future incarnation for their seminars too. So we have that. Those three all tie together. They're all cut from the same cloth. This scientific dogma, which has been completely discredited. Just ISON alone has proven the fact that we are in a plasma electric universe. When ISON passed by Mars, it sparked Mars up and turned Mars glowing green, just at a time when NASA happened to be shut down for lack of funding. Go figure, right? Yep. And so utterly debunking all their nonsensical notions about expanding universes and the redshift theory and all that. All the information to debunk all that has been around for a long time. In the past, they simply circled the wagons with their peer review process, but now they can't because of the internet. There's too much original research being done. So that's why they're creating all these priesthoods again within the so-called whistleblower field. You have all these ex-military people who present themselves as the omniscient authorities on UFOs. And then you have all these other people in the scientific community who try to present themselves as being mavericks, right? And then you have the New Agers. Okay, so the point of relevance is, and cycling back to the subject matter, is UFO researchers today drop the ball when they're dismissive of accounts of people who say, I'm in contact with beings who are from Sirius, and they're humanoid, and some of them are kind of like light blue, but there's a variety of beings from just the Sirius star system, A and B. There's numerous inhabited planets there, not only on this plane of existence, but other planes of existence. And a point should be kept in mind that when these serious researchers, some of whom will admit to reptilians being real, some of them are aware of the deep black interaction between elements of the military aerospace community and negative ETs. But then their minds kind of rebel at this whole notion that people are still having what amount to contacts. But the thing about it is the people that I'm in contact with, no pun intended, have both positive and negative experiences. They know that reptilians are real. They know that the deep black military is real because they've been electromagnetically beamed. They've been gang stalked. They've been targeted individuals. They've come out of cult-like families, et cetera, et cetera. But on the other hand, there has been these benevolent beings who tell them, and these beings do not necessarily exist on our plane of existence. Oftentimes they're in a higher plane of existence, higher dimensions, higher frequencies, because this is a frequency war. Right. And our goal in life, those of us who are in this combat arena, if you will, is to sustain ever higher light frequencies. Because, and we'll talk more about this later, a lot of us have, once again, a morphic blueprint resonance of not only our past lives here as a Terran, but elsewhere in the cosmos, whether we originated from Sirius, Orion, Lyra, or any number of other places, Alpha Draconis. And so what we have are people who are being contacted, oftentimes by beings from a higher frequency, and they're telling so-called serious researchers this, but the serious researchers are dropping the ball. Well, fine. Then these people will go and they will find someone else who will take them seriously. I want to provide validation for all those people out there. You're real. You know you're real. You know the experiences you've had are real. You know the downloads you've been receiving from them are real. And what's interesting to me, Solaris, is the real players in all this, the real hardcore spiritual warriors. Many of them are really old souls. They have past lives. And I'm talking mostly about MyLabs here, okay? The kind of MyLabs that I'm in combo with. These MyLabs often have past lives as being shamans, high priestesses in ancient Egypt, in Atlantis, Lemuria, or they were elders or medicine men or shamans in South America, Zulu shamans. It just runs the gamut. But it doesn't stop there. Many of these people have memories of being on other worlds, in other lives, in the long distant past.
Right.
And what's interesting is they remember being what we would call aliens, but they remember being involved in a series of endless wars in linear time in the Orion constellation and elsewhere throughout the cosmos. And we must remember that a lot of the beings we see on this planet, be they quadrupeds or insects, often have a humanoid analog in the cosmos and in the multiverse in general. For example, an obvious one is the reptilians. We see four-legged reptiles, and then in ancient times there were upright bipedal reptiles like Stenosicosaurus, also known as Troodon, which one NASA consultant, Dr. Dale Russell, postulated if it managed to survive the extinction of the dinosaurs, perhaps by escaping into the lava tube systems of all these underground tunnel systems, that if it had lived to the present day, he'd even had an artist commission a sculptor commission a sculpture of what this being would look like today, and it looks very much like a reptilian or reptilian gray cross. But the point being is that that's just one example of a quadruped and also a biped from Paleo ancient times. We also see insects that are sentient beings in the cosmos. For example, we see mantis beings. We see insectoids that look like upright, overgrown cockroaches or ants. Some even have multiple 6 arms, but they're upright, right? And we also have the analogs of the mammals. It would help people to do research on all the available data. We have the retired and rather late Colonel Wendell Stevens, who wrote a series of books. What he did was he scoured the world for all these so-called contactee accounts where people were having encounters with beings that were benevolent and would show them around, like I talked about earlier. I'm just going to take a sip for a moment.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
And just as we have mammalia, 4-legged bears, for example, here, or primates here, or lion beings here, there is an analog to that in the cosmos. And what's interesting is this ties right into esoterica and mystical thought going back countless centuries, wherein a lot of the seers, mystics, and adepts stated that not only was life essentially what we would call terraformed here, but a lot of these beings, a lot of these 4-legged beings were brought here from elsewhere. And what's interesting is after the celestially driven cataclysms, and it's all in the fossil record too, these mass extinction events, someone or something keeps repopulating the land masses once the Earth is settled into its new axis with more mammals, right? We see this again and again, and it's very similar to the so-called Cambrian explosion, which biologists and evolutionists don't want to go anywhere near. It's like for so long, millions of years, there was only prokaryotes, little single-celled organisms, and then whammo, and then seemingly overnight, there's a multitude of different creatures, some quite large in the oceans of the world, right? Because that just flies in the face of the whole gradual evolutionary process where everything's supposed to take a lot of time, right? Suddenly, whammo, we have all these life forms. Well, they were brought here. And that's why in Paleo ancient times, there was always, well, not always, but oftentimes a mega version of today's mammals. There were mega-sized rhinoceroses. In Australia, there was a mega kangaroo. There was a mega wombat. A wombat looks like a big kind of rat kind of being, except they had like a mega version of it. Everything was mega. Well, not everything again in the old days. Pardon me for the hyperbole. But so the point being, and the point of relevance is that once again, the so-called serious UFO researchers have dropped the ball because they're cherry-picking data, because they're stovepiping data, and because their own limited understanding, because they don't believe in reincarnation, because they don't have an understanding also, I must add, and I've been talking too long, I should let you
no, you're doing
make a
fine.
point here. Because they don't understand the concept of proxy warfare either. Mm-hmm. I'm a military historian, and I don't take many historians, or especially military historians, very seriously, because just as we see false flag directed history events on the surface these days, I can pinpoint campaigns and battles in World War II where things were deliberately stymied, where a spanner was thrown in the works to stall out campaigns, to put the wrong commanders in place, to deliberately cut off supplies, to stall out advances, especially in the European theater of operations in August of 1944. A whole nother story. But the whole idea of it was to give time for the Soviet Red Army to move in from the east and thereby set up what became the Cold War. The world supposedly divided into two opposames, but actually both sides being played against the middle. Well, this kind of proxy warfare has played out endlessly in our Terran history. Mm-hmm. In North America, for example, the Pawnee and the Crow were frequently used against the Lakota, the Northern Cheyenne. The Lakota and several bands of the Lakota were a very large, aggressive, militaristic society. I know a lot don't want to hear this. I'm very much steeped in, and I want to learn more about Lakota mysticism, but we can't ignore history either. Mm-hmm. The Lakota moved in, and then they displaced a lot of these existing tribes, moved them out of their traditional hunting grounds, took their women and their children and other things. And so, enemy of my enemy is my friend, and so on and so forth. The army, not surprisingly, recruited a lot of members of the Pawnee tribe and the Crow to work and scout against the Lakota, the several bands of the Lakota and the Northern Cheyenne in particular. Mm-hmm. We see the same thing in the campaigns against the Comanches and the Kiowas, and also even before the Revolutionary War, the British Army and Continental Militia working for the British Army did the same thing. The Iroquois Confederacy was basically a subsidiary. They had an alliance with the British monarchy. And a lot of tribes that refused to be assimilated by the Iroquois Confederacy, who happened to live on land coveted by settlers and coveted by the crown, et cetera, or who happened to be allied with the French. Well, the Iroquois Confederacy was used to go and either assimilate or otherwise subdue those recalcitrant tribes. We see the same thing with the Cherokee. The British Army and the monarchy used the Cherokee to push northward to displace existing tribes in the Ohio Valley. Ancient times, we go back to ancient times, we see the same thing. History is replete with such examples. So why is it so unusual or impossible to believe that people who have a certain morphic resonance blueprint of DNA from not just one, but a number of ET races would be tasked with or volunteer to have a number of incarnations here? And again, many times, not only are they seers, mystics, yogis, etc. in these past Terran lives, oftentimes they're like strategists, they're military commanders. Sometimes they're both. They're mystics and they're warriors. Mm-hmm. Very few seem to be of the grunt level variety, okay? Just simple foot soldiers. Because a lot of times these people may be warlords and military commanders in their past lives here, But there were also military commanders in these outer space alliances. And yes, there are these outer space alliances. This is one of these things that these serious researchers are extremely dismissive of. Mm-hmm. We see here on the surface, going back countless millennia, tribal councils, intertribal councils, empires. Okay, in some of my past lives, and I'll own up to it, I helped expand a number of tyrannical regimes and empires as a military warlord or a commander. And in other lives, I had more of a mystical kind of bent, right? Mm-hmm. And I've come across other people who likewise were, and some of these people I shared lives with, right?
Right.
Past lives with. Well, we know that the so-called negative ETs work with each other. And I'll throw a bone to some of the listeners out there who are always chirping at me because they say, oh, he only talks about negative reptilians. Okay. The negative reptilians are the ones causing the problems, so I emphasize with them. They're the ones that have the draconian reptilian empire, right? But I must say, just to throw a disclaimer out and a bone, that there are good reptilians. Mm-hmm. Because I know people who've been helped by good reptilians, and these good reptilians were suitably punished and in some cases probably destroyed. Mm-hmm. Now we know that souls and whatnot transmute into something else. They were just basically, that existence was ended when the factions that are negative found out about it. Okay, and there are also reptilians who we call messengers. They're not hostile. They're kind of benign. They show up and they just leave a cryptic message, and sometimes it's not such a cryptic message. And we also remember many people were reptilians in past lives, and they're here to work out karma. And by their own admission, they say they were an evil reptilian or evil Draco, and now they're making an amends. Okay, so that's happening too. Mm-hmm. The point being that we see alliances of negative beings. Any abduction researcher or abductee, and I've never heard of a good abduction researcher that didn't have their own experiences, first and foremost. And if they don't own up to having experiences, they're not much of an abductee, or
I agree.
Have no integrity. All
yeah,
right?
They're not test pilots. How can they?
They're not test pilots. How can they know? Right?
I agree.
I don't want to know what they know. They're not qualified to tell people like you and I anything. Mm-hmm. So what we see, not only in the underground bases, where there's joint military aerospace interaction going on with ETs. And there are oftentimes a number of different ETs. There's not only greys and reptilians, but there could be mantis beings. There could be insectoids. And again, there's factions thereof. I don't want all the people who know that they've had contacts with this or that or other good being that looks like a gray. Gray is a generic term. There's any number of different gray factions. Same thing with the mantises. I know that people tell me that I trust implicitly that they're in contact with good mantis beings, and I wouldn't doubt them. Okay, we're just talking about ones that for whatever reason, either they were suborned by the Draco reptilian empire, whatever the case may be, or they're going along to get along, they're in cahoots with the negative reptilians. So we know that there's alliances of negative beings in this greater Draco empire, and the Orion empire, going back to this ancient war, what's going on in this solar system, in this quadrant of the galaxy, is merely an extension of what's been going on in these wars in the Orion constellation and elsewhere. And these ancient wars have been written about in ancient texts, the Babylonian, Enuma, Elish, and so on and so forth. Sitchin wrote a book, The Wars of Gods and Men, et cetera, et cetera. Dr. Joseph Farrell talks about these interplanetary wars, right? Mm-hmm. I don't agree with everything he says, but he makes some good points. So that point being made, and countless people having attested to the fact that they've seen these negative beings in cahoots with one another. So there's some kind of alliance going on. Call it what one will. If they don't want to call it a confederation or a grouping or a faction, fine. Don't call it that. Call it whatever feels comfortable to you. Now, on the other hand, there are beings that I would perceive, and many perceive, to be good, and who many people implicitly know that they are descended from. And these beings, oftentimes existing in a higher frequency or dimension, but not always, because again, they have their analogs, and they work through proxies and allies on these lower planes of in our ever-increasing plane, right? I would call ours a lower plane, or ever-increasing frequency, that is.
Right.
There seems to be groupings of these good beings. Now, let me backtrack a bit to decades ago. Brad Steiger, the prolific Brad Steiger, who wrote innumerable books, one of the true living legends, because he also talked about positive and negative beings. It wasn't just one or the other for Brad and Sherry Steiger. They knew better. Mm-hmm. All the real players, all the true spiritual warriors know that there's positive and negative beings, and they're caught in the middle. It's a galactic cosmic tug of war playing out on multiple planes, not just this one. Anywho, if I remember the story correctly, and I just spoke to somebody who related the story to me and provided further details, Brad Steiger, in one of his books, recounts a story of how Gene Roddenberry, yes, Gene Roddenberry, and if I remember correctly, Arthur C. Cook, who we now know was a CIA asset as well as being a pedophile.
Is that Arthur C. Clarke, you mean?
Yes, Arthur C. Clarke. I take that back. Arthur C. Clarke, he wrote 2001 and things like that. Because in my studies as surface level intelligence, counterintelligence, special operations, his name has come up in a number of instances with British intelligence, CIA, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. Anywho, in this story, at the very least, Gene Roddenberry, and if memory serves, Arthur C. Clarke, had a private meeting with a number of these so-called discredited, debunked contactees. Isn't that interesting? This is back decades ago. I can't remember exactly when. And these contactees all claim to have being contacted by a particular group of ETs, and sometimes more than one group. Now, we know that these kinds of stories go on. There's this Sixto La Paz story in South America. The beings he claims contact with and the people around him claim contact with, they're human-looking beings that come from, I think, Ganymede, a moon of, I think it is Saturn. Someone correct me if I'm wrong.
I want to say Jupiter, but you're probably right.
Jupiter. Okay, yeah, I think you're right, Jupiter.
Double check.
And what's it? Yeah, it's one of those big so-called gaseous giants. And an interesting aside, those beings say, as far as all the strife and the miasma of misery that's going on our planet, they say to humanity in general, don't call us, we'll call you, in so many words. Want nothing to do with what's going on with in your neck of the solar system. Anyway, and then there's Timothy Good did a lot of work talking about the group of people, this spanned generations, in Italy that were having contacts with human-looking beings, some giants, by contemporary standards. Mm-hmm. But the ones that weren't so giant, they can fit right into our society. Now, that's a well-known, ongoing contactee case, because these contactee cases never stop. Because when the Greys emerged in people's consciousness, with Bud Hopkins' books and whatnot, in Latin America, the Ukraine, Russia, Europe, people were still having ongoing contacts with these human-looking beings, and they've been called Nordics, Swedes, and a variety of other names. Palladians, and while I'm on the subject, when people are dismissive of beings who say they come from Sirius or the Pleiades, you're not only being dismissive of the person who's telling you that, you're being dismissive of the ancient Comedians, i.e. ancient Egyptians, who from their scheme of things regarded Sol, our sun, as essentially part of a binary system with Sirius. Mm-hmm. And their lore states that this is that we come from Sirius, that we have active stargates in and around the Giza complex that go back to Sirius, among other places. The whole lore of the Giza pyramid, connection to Orion, et cetera, right? And add to that the lore of the original people of the world, the Aboriginal people in Australia who claim they're from the Pleiades, the elders of North and South America who say they're from the Pleiades, or their people are from the Pleiades, or Sirius or some other constellation. Because you're not just laughing at not you, but people are not just being dismissive of the shamans and the elders. They're being dismissive of people who possess and can wield at a moment's notice what we would refer to as superhuman powers.
I agree.
I know people who have been on the res in South Dakota, on the Lakota res, who've seen some powerful magic. People who I believe implicitly. People who also happen to be my labs, positive, negative experiences, and have encounters with a variety of different beings. Likewise with the Aboriginals. Powerful medicine, right? So again, I liken this scientific dogma to like a fly that keeps batting its head up against a window pane. When inches away, there's a gap in the window and it can just fly out. It's like bzz, 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 bump, 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 right?
Yeah.
Reincarnation, bzz, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, it's the same thing with the scientific dogmatists. That's why they're irrelevant. That's why they're bypassed. And nobody really cares that anyone has any self-worth, cares what they say anymore. But cycling back to the point I was making, Gene Roddenberry and Arthur C. Clarke met with this group of contactees who claimed to be in contact with a particular groups of particular benevolent aliens in decades ago when a lot of people were having these experiences. What's interesting is this group of people in this private meeting told Gene Roddenberry and Arthur C. Clarke, oh yes, there's a federation. There is literally a galactic federation. And here's where the eyes glaze over and the eyes roll in the back of the head. And, oh, he's talking about galactic federations. I just made a point earlier about intertribal councils and alliances and factions and proxy warfare. If someone doesn't want to call it a galactic federation, don't call it that. Call it a grouping. Call it a confederacy. Call it an alliance. Or don't even think about it. Because people that don't want to look at it in this depth have basically been bypassed, right? So next thing you know, Gene Roddenberry comes out with all these stories, Star Trek, Next Generation, et cetera, putting out that meme. Now, the problem where the New Age airheads comes in is that they keep spewing out this pablum. No such thing as negative ETs. Oh, the Galactic Council, the Galactic, Federation, blah, 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 which even made me roll my eyes decades ago until I met people who I knew were legitimate, who I knew had hardcore negative experiences, and who I knew were getting real downloads from real benevolent beings who were grouped in councils. Now, to suggest that none of these beings in higher planes or even on this plane do not have councils, quorums, call them what one will, is to suggest that all these different beings individually are running amok and have no coordination whatsoever. Okay, that to me is an untenable, nay, patently absurd suggestion to claim that all of these beings, when we know, those of us that have been in this field, know that there are these alliances of negative beings and factions therein. There's not just one consolidated block. There's factions, even factions of reptilians. Now, it goes back to this whole bias, a priori bias, cherry picking, stovepiping, right? Having to seek the need, this shame-based need to seek the approval of others and sound all professional and sound all credible. Oh, we can't discuss anything to do with like a Syrian council or a Syrian council that interacts with a greater galactic council. That's silly. That's Star Trek stuff. Well, where did Gene Roddenberry get that information?
Yeah, some of those storylines are spot on too, by the way. Some
of those storylines, and I must say also that the Star Trek, the Stargate series, before it degenerated to all the stuff about the Ori the last couple of seasons. I didn't need that, but the leading up to the point where they're battling the Goa'uld, although the spin was the military are the good guys, and the other spin, which is critical, because it ties in to what I'll make one more point, and I really want to hear your thoughts on this, because what the military people behind Stargate SG-1 and the movie did, and the movie, if you can find a director's cut, brilliant.
Yeah,
was that they put out the spin that the comedian Neaters, Raw in the original movie, and then a whole slew of ancient Near East and even in Japanese gods and goddesses were all of necessity bad, that they were not creator gods. Again, this goes back to the whole patriarchal control system as well, right? And what do we see in Stargate SG-1? We have these snake-like aliens that burrow into the base of people's necks and take them over, right? And that these snake-like aliens have a genetic memory and the knowledge of all of their particular bloodline. Isn't that interesting?
Right.
Well, you look at that TV show, and who are the bad guys? Osiris is a bad guy. Anubis is a bad guy. Hathor. Hathor is the god of love and nurturing, and in many of her manifestations is a cow, right? I'm puzzled why they don't have like Sekhmet is a bad female. Sekhmet has been really like defamed, and
they
that's
all
only
have.
one.
Unfortunately, yeah, it's really a disservice to what they represent on a higher level, truly.
But what it does, what I've come to understand, especially fast forwarding to today, is look how the Illuminati, so-called, has hijacked all that symbolism. You have these mind-controlled people like Beyonce and Rihanna in the Super Bowl halftime show, and pyramids all over the place, and the Eye of Horus.
They don't know what it means.
They don't know what it means. And people that only have this surface level, they've just found out about their rights about a year ago or something, or they just found out about the monetized debt system like 5 years ago. And they're all steeped in the patriarchal, you're an original sin or anything to do with spirit guides. See, this is the meme that the Catholic Church pushed upon everyone and the offshoots, that you're such an original sinner that don't even think about going within, because anything that suggests or smacks of a spirit guide of a higher frequency, higher plane is of necessity demonic. That's the message, right? Yep. And look how disempowering. Look how, and then also the other side of that is their banishment of the doctrine of reincarnation, right?
Right.
Which the original Jesus, the Yeshua, the Essene, right, who was steeped in all the mystery traditions, knew all about that stuff because that was the norm, and even to this day in traditional societies. Right. So what they have done to further disempower people, especially those who know they've had past lives, as like a high priestess in a temple of Hathor, or say as a scribe, one of Ptah's scribes, or whatever the case may be. Then all they keep hearing from all these surface level truthers on Facebook and other places, right, is symbolism bad.
Right.
But see, that goes back to the imposition of the alphabet language, which shunted us into the left brain, scribes, laws, fear-based, original sin, et cetera, et cetera. The symbology touches us at a very deep right brain level. Right?
Mm-hmm. It triggers cellular recall, James.
It triggers cellular recall.
For beings like us who are advanced and old, not to override you, but you understand that we remember when we see certain things like ancient pyramids or something like that. It has cellular resonance with our design, so we understand the decoding factor, whereas most people see it as regular generic Illuminati. And I don't believe in the Illuminati they believe in, because it's not even in the same ballpark.
It's not even the same ballpark because they don't understand that. And I love what Michael Tessarian says. He says, Christians, they've only been in this fight for the last 2,000 years, and they try to lord it over everyone else and castigate everyone else as being idol worshippers, right? When you look at these traditions, that's what the purification rituals are all about. That's what the sweat lodge is all about. In Native North American tribes, and a lot of the purification is just to retain the inner harmony, divest oneself of the inner shadow. We all have the inner shadow. Right? We all have it. And so what do? They put out that Illuminati, quote unquote, tainted meme of all the symbolism. And those people who know they've had past lives as a temple priestess in the temple of Hathor, who know they were like a South American shaman, who know they were in Atlantis, if they're still shame-based, if they're still seeking the approval of others, if they're still wasting their time at these UFO meetings where all they talk about is astronomy and bonehead science, that's going to shut them down. And I encourage all the listeners out there, and your listeners are very advanced. I'm talking about those who stumble upon this after it goes up on YouTube. Mm-hmm. If you fall into that category where you still go to these pointless UFO meetings, but they're still talking about lights in the sky, why are you doing that to yourself? Why are you abusing yourself in that fashion? Detach from all that. Work on your own inner healing, inner guidance. There are guides, and there are safe way to contact guides of the highest frequency. And here's something too. Some of these guides, lo and behold, they look and for all intents and purposes are ancient Comedian netters. Isn't that interesting? Whether it's Sekhmet, whether it's Isis, whether it's Horus or Anubis. And that's not surprising when you consider some of these people were high priestesses or high priests in a past life, sometimes multiple times, not just one life, because in their own record, the ancient Egyptians said our history goes back 36,000 years. Of course, the bonehead Egyptologists say, oh no, that's just a metaphor. Just like how they say that anything found in a tomb is funerary text. They always spin everything out, right? Mm-hmm. They always have their own stovepiping, cherry-picking mindset. When by their own admission, the Egyptians say they go back at least 36,000 years. At a time when the gods and goddesses walked amongst the people. Mm-hmm. Now, what's interesting is the Anunnaki. The Sumerian texts, the cuneiform say the same thing. Now here's an example of cherry picking. The Egyptologists and the Sumerologists will just talk until you're blue in the face about ancient jurisprudence, agricultural yields, right? Mm-hmm. Codes and ethics and their tool making. That's all real. But anything to do with an existence that goes back thousands of years, and the gods walked amongst us, that's mystical mumbo jumbo, cherry picking, stovepiping, right? Mm-hmm. So anyway, I just want to make that point that those of you who have this in your past lives and you're conscious of these in your past lives, why is it any less valid for a person who has past life memories as a 19th century English sheep farmer, as a 16th century Venetian merchant, as a Native American shaman? Why isn't a past life memory of being a lion warlord, of being a Syrian, a member of a Syrian high council? Why aren't those memories any less valid than the former?
Exactly.
You see?
Well, it's about empowerment.
It's empowerment. So, as I catch my breath,
okay,
please, let me just hear what you got to say on this.
We'll probably be heading for a break real quick until we'll be right back, but I totally agree with you, and it's really about self-empowerment and going within and knowing your divinity, if you ask me. I mean, what it really boils down to is accessing that internal source energy, which, of course, is multifaceted and multi-universal. And, I mean, we're quite the database if we access that information, and I know you know that.
Oh, yes. Yeah. That's what they don't want us to know.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. And the Godhead, is the God. So once you activate to higher self-oversoul superconscious through initiations and sacred mystery schools like they did in the old days, you get to that Godhead status where you're actually in a transfiguration state and your molecular design changes and alters. I mean, they knew that back in the old world days. And nowadays, of course, a lot of that's fallen through the cracks. But those of us who are here have that memory. We still have it in the cellular coding,
yes,
I believe.
Yes, we do. So, absolutely.
Yeah. Well said, James. I can't resonate with you more on this, and I'm just kind of letting you roll with all what you want to talk about here. Looks like we are going to take a break real quick, if I can even spit it out, and we'll be right back, you guys. So stay tuned at Dark Matter Radio Network with Hyperspace and my special guest, James Bartley. What an intro. Thank you very much there, Keith Rowland. And James, you're back.
Yes.
All right. So wonderful information and insight you're sharing with us the first hour. I really appreciate it. And like I said, I like to let you just roll with the energy. If I feel like chiming in, I'll do so. But I wanted you to cover what you felt guided to do. I knew you had a lot on your mind tonight. So, and if you hear a kitten in the background, I apologize. He's right next to me, but that's not good enough apparently. So.
It's very apt, we were just talking about, certain feline energies. That's fine with me.
You're right.
Thank you for letting me discuss all these issues. And yes, they've been dear to my heart. And I've heard so much stuff out there about how things that we know to be absolutely serious, the truth, if you will, and the truth is the most subjective of words, is being left by the wayside. In the process, people are being invalidated. I've never been one of those types who sought to go and educate the public. To me, that's like an impractical, non-viable strategic goal. It's what the public that can't even see the perma-chemtrail haze above us, and you want me to try to prove something to them? No.
Right.
The essence of my work has always been to enlighten others, actually not even enlighten them, but to provide them a conceptual framework for stuff they already know about, to help them to reintegrate, heal, and if all they want to do is heal and just be left alone, basically, and unmolested by any kind of negative force, that's fine. That in itself will raise the overall vibe of this planet. And we're on a crest of a wave of energy streaming in from the galactic core. The Schumann resonance has increased from 7.83 to 12.3 something last I checked. We really live on a plane that is increasing in its frequency. A number of the articles that I had read a couple of years ago, and a couple of my friends I know have done screen saves with these articles, and I hope I can, they still saved them, but articles talking about how even stable, and these are scientific journals, where even stable particles, carbon-14, for example, and what are we? We're made out of a lot of us are basically carbon-14, carbon-based units, as they say in Star Trek. Even normally stable elements like carbon-14 are exhibiting faster decay. Let alone unstable elements. So what does that mean for what mainstream scientists call the fabric of time? If even stable elements like carbon-14 are exhibiting rapid decay.
Right.
And it has mainstream scientists basically freaking out. Now, to me, that's not bad news. To me, that's another sign that this whole rotten paradigm is changing. And
well, it's matter, it's energy, it's converting.
It's matter, it's energy. It's all matter is energy which resonates or vibrates at a certain frequency, as you know. This is a frequency war, and it's incumbent upon us to ride that frequency wave. And there's a lot of ways to do it. And what we will do in the process is, and I want people to really pay attention to this, many of you out there have, for lack of a better term, and this term has been used in certain books, ascension codes built into your DNA. And what you can do is find a way to activate those ascension codes. And oftentimes what the negative ETs and controlling archontic factor do is they emplace within the DNA blocks, stoppers, call them what one will, to prevent this ascension process from happening. And also, we're being bathed in scalar waves, HARP, the perma-chemtrail haze, et cetera, et cetera. So, but that's not going to stop this ascension process from happening. Try as they might, they cannot stop it because the ancients, our forebears, saw this time coming. They knew that when this 26,000-year cycle would roll around again, we would find ourselves in what the Maya called the dark rift, right in line with the galactic core.
Right, the Kali rift, yeah.
The Kali rift, that's another name for it, the Kali rift. Again, we have another goddess who was They don't even understand the symbolism of the knife and the blood out of the mouth and the severed head. It's just way over their heads. But there's anyway the Kali rift, the dark rift. And so we need to ride the crest of that wave. And this is a plasma electric universe. I'm a firm believer that we do have, for lack of a better term, an extra mini solar system in this solar system. And it's the return of a mini solar system that's come through many times. So not only do we have the galactic superwave, which Dr. Paul Laviolette talks about, but we have this mini solar system, and it's really amping up the plasma electric nature of the sun and the solar system in general. What's interesting is how the mainstream scientists spin it out and say, oh, we're in the quietest phase of the sun. It's counterintuitive. When you look at the SOHO imagery system, you just see like solar flares shooting out all over the place, and geomagnetic storms and what have you. And yet they say, the experts, that it's a quiet time that we're in. No, it's not. And that's part of the reason for the perma-chemtrail haze, not only so we can't see the second sun, right, but also to prevent us from being bathed in these intensified cosmic rays, because the photonic energy and the cosmic rays will activate our higher centers.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a multifaceted agenda behind the chemspring. It's not just nanobots. It's not just poisoning and depopulation and whatnot. That's part of it as well. The controlling factor know very well the celestial timetable. They know that we are at the doorstep and in the midst, actually, of these celestially driven cataclysms. We see this in the sinkholes. We see this in the volcanic activity. To be sure, scalar weapons and HARP are a part of that. But what the latter are doing is merely accentuating an ongoing, entirely predictable process. And because the controlling factor have secreted all this knowledge within the Vatican and systematically destroyed, which they didn't, steal and secrete away from all the traditional cultures. Mainstream academia has nothing to say about this except something dismissive, probably, about the celestially driven cataclysm. So,
excuse me,
our forebears, our stellar forebears, our guides in multiple higher planes of existence, knew we would be here at this point in time with all this going on. So our job is to activate those ascension codes and regain all those metaphysical powers. This is why the communist Chinese are systematically wiping out the Falun Gong, because of the Falun Gong's metaphysical, indeed superhuman abilities. This is why the Indian police that worked on the reservation systematically hunted down the medicine men and the medicine women, threw their medicine bundles into the fire and smashed their Chinunpa pipes and all that, because they were under orders to systematically destroy the old traditional ways, which was ancient stellar wisdom.
Exactly.
But they cannot undo, as you point out, the morphic blueprint resonance in our cellular memory. They can't do that. And so there are a number of ways to safely activate those codes. And the new way of just channeling any discarnate entity that comes along that spews out metaphysical pablum is not the way to go about doing it. I remember back years ago, I'd come across these people. God has blessed them, right? I'd look at the tormented expression in their eyes. I'd feel the vibe of trauma and heartache they've endured, not just for this lifetime, but for many lifetimes. It's very common, I found, sadly, that a lot of these spiritual warriors and most of the real players in this cosmic spiritual warfare arena are women. There's a handful of men, but most of the real players are women, because they retain their heart-centeredness, their inner harmony, and they operate from a place of the heart rather than from the ego, where it's very easy to activate the egos of males, whereas not so easy to activate the ego of a heart-centered woman who's experienced both positive and negative experiences. Because these women tell me that in their past lives they were burned at the stake, they were they were tried as a witch and found guilty and drowned, and they were stoned, and it goes, they were forced into a nunnery. I mean, it goes on and on, because that's the patriarchy manifesting itself again and again throughout the ages. Well, when I came across these New Age women and some New Age men, and a lot of them dressed the part. Now, I would agree that from an energy flowing standpoint, it's always good to wear flowy clothes, because that's kind of it flows with our energetic nature. We are electromagnetic organisms, which interlink with frequencies everywhere. But what some of these New Age gurus did was they looked and they dressed the part, and they spoke in metaphysical riddles, and I would look at them. So either some of these channelers were full-on hosts for reptilian or Draco entities, because I could tell their energy emanating from them, or they were severely damaged, oftentimes women, who were not discerning and who were channeling some negative entity in the guise of a positive entity. And the best disinformation always has a kernel of truth. So when all these New Age channelers were spewing out all this metaphysical pablum and sprinkling in, stuff about galactic councils and the Galactic Federation of Light, et cetera, yes, that definitely muddied the waters, especially for those who were having legitimate contacts with beings who presented themselves as coming from a real higher dimensional council. So this is precisely why traditional cultures have an initiatory process. They have an initiatory purification process. This is why, for example, the Aboriginal culture in Australia is so hardcore about their marriage and their breeding laws, because they know if the wrong people get together, the potential exists for someone to be born with a preponderance of reptilian DNA. They don't want that to happen. They would just as soon kill the couple that wants to marry if they are of the wrong genetic match, than have them marry and risk the chance of them siring or bringing offspring into the world who could potentially become hosts down the line. That's how hardcore the Aboriginals are.
Wow. Well, you think they would transcend it, though? I mean, even if you do have a lineage of whatever species, why don't you just ascend with the technology or the type of, and whatever it is that you're connected to? Why don't you just ascend with that energetic as opposed to just being controlled by it?
That's a very good question. And there are many people. We all have, I wouldn't say all, but many have, to one degree or another, reptilian DNA. All the great commanders in history, to be sure, some of them had that element. And then when you read the lore and you listen to the past lives of people who claim to be reptilians in past lives, or a hybrid variant, and I've heard, it runs the gamut of, because of the splicing and dicing and genetic engineering, throughout the ages, throughout the cosmos, I've heard every conceivable combination: lion people, reptilian, insectoid, and these are played out. These are played out in testimony from my labs, who've seen just about every variety of hybrid being one can imagine. So it's all about overcoming the inner shadow, whether someone has a preponderance of reptilian DNA or not. For example, one of my closest friends, and you watch how they spin this one out, right? One of my closest friends has the House of Windsor, i.e., the British royals, on one side, and he has the Rothschilds on the other, which basically is the same family, right? But I trust this guy implicitly. This guy is a full-on spiritual warrior and has been battling the reptilians lifetime after lifetime. In fact, we served in a military capacity in a past life before. So here he is an example of, if you strictly go by genetics, oh, he's a bad guy. No, he's not. He's overcome his inner shadow. He's risen above that. He's overcome to become something, that we should all aspire to. So just reptilian Draco genetics alone is not. Now, there's some people that have a preponderance of Rep or Draco, DNA. You got to kind of keep them somewhat at arm's length, or if you're going to work with them, you got to kind of keep them on a short leash, because they have a tendency to kind of run off the rails sometimes, right? So, and I'm not, today in this highly racially charged world, right? And this is why I've always been taken to task for always talk about the negative reptilians. Well, it's the inner shadow. If you don't want to call it a preponderance of reptilian DNA, the extreme version of that is serial killers, child molesters, et cetera, right?
Yeah, and I think it's overcoming programming, period. Whether it's from a past lifetime or on this lifetime or this timeline or childhood, whatever. It's just really just overcoming a program that's defective, almost like a virus.
It is. It's a glitch in the matrix, and it's a glitch in the original morphic blueprint. And now that you mention that, I'm glad that you brought it up. We had a wonderful discussion. I mean, folks, if you hadn't had a chance to talk to Solaris sometime, I mean, this gal is really, really switch on at so many different levels. We talked about our misgivings about the miasma which passes for the so-called super soldier community, right? And, we're not going to name names, but we're just going to talk about the contrast between those who haven't worked through their inner shadow and those who are giving full vent and indulging in their base nature. Because we talked about how so many of these people who present themselves as super soldiers, and I detest that term because, and here's why, because the term super soldier denotes something that's great, that's something that's uplifting, that's something that we should aspire to. It puts a fine gloss on all the horrendous torture and mind control and abuse, and not only multi-generationally, but lifetime after lifetime in some cases, that these people have been subjected to. Like women, female MILABs, female monarchs being gang raped, et cetera, there's nothing super about any of that as far as I'm concerned. So what the term super soldier does is it allows people to latch onto that phrase, especially overcompensating males, I hate to say. And and they see it as a means of gaining more control over their circumstances. Because deep down, these guys, mostly guys, but some women, they have a lot of fear, and they have a lot of unresolved shame-based issues. And because of a preponderance of this, that, or the other DNA and programming and previous lives, they can't help being like a disruptive force or intentionally or unwittingly, conversely unwittingly, confusing force in the whole MILAB super soldier field. And on the other hand, you have these women who present themselves as super soldiers or MILABs who have been subjected to a lot of mind control, have not worked through their inner shadow issues, have not worked through their wounded, shame-based child issues, and they've been programmed and turned loose to attack any woman who comes forth with personal stories about MILAB experiences, monarch experiences, project people experiences in general, whether they do it under their real name or under a pseudonym. These program women attack women who come forth unmercifully. Not only do they flame them on the internet and on Facebook, et cetera, because of what they learned or were indoctrinated or programmed with in the cults or in the mind control centers that they were in. These people will actually use their intentions in magical workings, if you will, in a very malign way, and attack these other women who are coming forward in the astral dreamscape with their astral body. I mean, it runs the gamut. It's full-on spiritual warfare. It's not just like flaming on the internet. It's not just trolling and harassing online. It's full-on spiritual warfare. And oftentimes, these familiars, if you will, these negative archontic beings of various stripes, which follow that woman's or that man's bloodlines generationally over the years, they work with that woman or that man, and they provide guidance and inspiration, and they themselves will enter the fray and attack the people that are going forward. So So there's that dynamic too, and it's all part of the mix, and people have to detach from that because it's an unpleasant distraction to say the least, and it could be like life threatening. So people need to put.
Yeah, well, you know what it is? They're also, a lot of them are psychotronically programmed to a point where they get triggered by the presence of truth. And I've noticed that. I mean, there are some that just can't handle it because they're still working out their programs of what you call the shadow self versus somebody who's clear and has worked out all the control and the manipulation based on a false programming. So I've noticed that too. And they're very dangerous. You have to be very careful of these people that are triggered so easily. And like I said, this is an epidemic. And of course, it's not addressed on a global level. But when push comes to shove, think about it, James, how much mind control has been going on since the beginning of man-made time, regardless of psychotronics or whatever array system they're using. I mean, you're dealing with something that's been happening for a very, very long time here.
Well, just the patriarchy alone. There's a very good point, because the patriarchy alone has destroyed the divine feminine. Now the divine feminine is coming back, which is a great thing. And there has to be balance between the divine feminine and divine masculine. This is why overwhelmingly the trolls on Facebook and in the internet in general are these overcompensating, narcissistic, sociopathic, indeed in many cases psychopathic males, many of whom are full-on hosts for negative entities. And just as I'm absolutely convinced that just as in the military and increasingly in law enforcement, where in their training they're ordered basically to give vent to their inner rage, what I call their inner reptilian, just by just screaming and bellowing at the top of their lungs and just getting into a rage-filled state. There was an ex-soldier, an American soldier, who put out a video. And he was exposing all this stuff and the sham of all these archontically controlled wars. And at the start of his presentation, he and a friend, his friend playing the role of a drill sergeant, he playing the role of a recruit, acted out what it's like to give vent to that inner rage. And he was screaming and he was carrying on. In ancient times, we saw an example of this, how in many tribal societies especially, the warriors at a certain phase of their training and initiation would be made to don like a bear skin apparel or wolf skin apparel in order to assume the spirit, the ferocity, the martial prowess of those totemic animals, right? Well, in the training, we see them getting these guys to scream their heads off to give vent to their inner reptile, as I call it. Well, I see something happening with the internet trolls because I'm absolutely convinced this is what I've intuited. And a lot of these trolls don't need much encouragement anyway, but they're encouraged to give into their inner rage as they type out their hate-filled nasty grams, especially particularly to women in the private messages. Just the most vile, venomous, threatening messages, but the vibe that goes with it, right? Because I can feel that reptilian Draco vibe just by reading an email. Just when I get a nasty gram that shows up in my other box in Facebook, right? Every once in a while I get this morbid curiosity just to see what kind of nasty gram's in there. And the moment I open it, just the energy just hits my heart center, right?
Oh gosh.
I have to put my shields up. Well, look at society in general in this patriarchal reptilian controlled system. Nowadays, I forget what the latest stats are. 3 out of 4 women have been sexually, physically, emotionally abused at one time in their lives, multiple times in some cases, oftentimes starting in childhood, right? So what happens when a girl who happens to fall in, a woman who happens to fall into that demographic, who's been psychologically, physically, sexually abused, opens up a private email and gets hit full bore with that energetic blast right in her heart center? She'll lock up. It doesn't even occur to her sometimes to block and delete and unfriend these trolls. They just subject themselves to it. Because they lock up. It's part of, for example, when reptilians rape women who don't want to be raped, the very vibe of the reptilian essence, the energy, will instill paralysis in the woman. And we see this playing out in nature, where when a tiger growls, right? Say one that's old and infirm and can no longer, hunt four-legged prey, and then it's resorted to having to, go after humans as prey. When it roars, the vibration sets off a reverberation within the chest cavity of the person that's about to be preyed upon, and it induces paralysis. So the reptilians do the same thing when they instill this paralysis on women. And male human reptilian Draco hybrids have the same ability, whether it's just being verbally abusive, psychologically abusive, internet abusive, whatever the case may be. They emit that same vibe, and they're trained and they're encouraged to give full vent to it. Again, it's the frequency war. So what we're seeing is that the dark side, our contact control system, is pulling out all the stops. And so they're putting so-called Illuminati symbols in our face, which is really ancient heritage symbols, right? Mm-hmm. They're turning loose all these psychopaths in the school systems, in the media, and everywhere else, and it's created this virtual reality. And so people really, now more than ever, people need to go within and plug into that cellular memory, plug into divine source, detach as much as possible from the matrix. Like, I only use Facebook as a commo device, as a communication device. I go on there and first I check to see if anyone has desecrated my wall, right? And then after that, then I go into like my messages and I just respond. And to me, it's and I had to learn, because there's that addictive quality, and it is the matrix. The Facebook is, and so I've had to wean myself off of that. So, the need to compulsively scroll down and see what I've missed, et cetera, et cetera. Now I'm working with it, but in a more balanced way. And so that's what everyone needs to do, is detach as much as possible from the matrix.
Some water. Why don't you grab some water? And it's really nice to take a break from your computer. I must say, when you power it down and you power off your phone and you just kind of get away from all this dirty electricity, what I like to call it, it really does make a difference energetically. So it does. Yeah, definitely. Go ahead.
And do you have any thoughts on all this?
Well, basically, I mean, I'm just absorbing what you're saying, but I totally resonate with what you're talking about. And I also see, you talk about the reptilians, but I also get that they deploy a psychotronic interface, which is holographic, which also replicates a version of an extraterrestrial or a reptilian. Yeah, so you've got that mix also.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah, and
I
so
actually agree.
Yeah, some of these guys that are driven, the psychotics on the internet, they are all driven by psychotronic programming. I can guarantee that.
I agree. And I'm glad you brought that up, because you know a lot about a given facet of it, and then I know a bit about how certain types of electromagnetic beaming affect my labs, abductees, people they're trying to turn into serial murderers, whatever the case may be. And that's one of the things they do, is that they definitely mind control people, and they get them. They plant the seed that what they're seeing eventually, for some of them, is that it's not a real alien. It's just I'm being presented with either a hologram, and it varies from like a cardboard cutout to a midget dressed up in a gray uniform, or a child, whatever the case may be, because they do want to put out the meme that aliens aren't real, that it's all just that it's all human inspired mind control. Mm-hmm. I would argue, and this is just me, that because of this archontic influence, even a program that's a mind control program that's wholly staffed by what appear to be humans, ultimately, because of the archontic influence, it originates in some dark nether realm. I mean, it may manifest on the earthly plane, and there may not be any humans about, but it just that with so many of these techno geeks, they're shunted into the left brain. They fit a psych profile of people who want to dress up, share the power. They have all the techno goodies. They have no empathy, no compassion. If it feels good, do it. And so they tweak the knobs. Like, I know people who either were allowed to see, or with their own third eye remote vision, were able to see some of the people tweaking the knobs. And I'm talking about in a MyLab military alien sense. And they would see in a third eye vision, oftentimes young military personnel. Clearly young guys, but they're in military uniform. Other times they would see some young, I hate labels, but let's say like a young, what someone would perceive to be a computer geek with purple hair, and I have no qualms about anyone who wears body modification, whatever the case may be. But some of these people fit that mold, right? And they also fit a psychological profile. So they see somebody, like for example, in National Security Agency, one will find that many people in NSA fit into a certain profile, that they like computers, probably sometimes more. They like computers and techno goodies more than they like people, right? They fit in a certain kind of profile. And so what some of these MyLabs have seen is they've seen the kids. And these are just kids. And it's a seamless transition because they've been talent spotted years before. They may have grown up in a certain surveilled bloodline family. It's a seamless transition from playing with a joystick and all these violent shoot-'em-up games to going into these deep black projects where they're mind controlling people. And yes, there not only is there an element where they want people to think that they're seeing aliens. That's absolutely correct. But they've turned loose a number of them who, because they don't know any better, right? And then the best operative was one who doesn't know he's an operative or she's an operative, and they swear up and down that it's all just mind control. There are not really any aliens, and that in itself is a disempowering thing for those who know that they've had alien encounters. So one thing that I've observed is that the electromagnetic aspect of it ties into the psychiatric/medical tyranny. Because a lot of these SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and the whole gamut of psychotropic drugs, they not only destroy cognitive function, basically drive people crazy, in some cases make them very violent and psychotic. They're designed to do that. It even says on the inserts, right? But also they so lower the frequency of the users because these users have been plugged into the psychiatric tyranny. Some of these drugs so lower the frequency of the users that it makes it easier for them to be taken up as a host or to form an entity attachment, right?
Yeah, it basically tears up the astral body.
It tears up the auric. It knocks holes in the auric field, right?
Absolutely.
And this is what it's absolutely important for people to have what you call a mystical scientific approach to this problem, because we talk about auric fields, we talk about cellular memory, morphic blueprint resonance. It's bzzz, I think of a bee, right, or a fly trying to get out a window, right? It doesn't resonate because they've been shunted into the left brain, and because they're so cut off from that part of their divine origins, right? So what you have, and then we see the so-called illicit drug counterpart of this with crank and crystal meth, which I've known mental health professionals who worked in state hospitals, asylums in California and elsewhere, and they would sit in on 12-step support groups for meth users and crank users, a derivative of crystal methadone, and in group and privately amongst themselves, these tweakers, these meth heads will talk about, oh yes, voices would tell me, that to do this, do that, to kill and to stab and to watch, sadistic porn and watch child porn, and that's what these tweakers are saying. It's the entities, because their frequency has been altered to fit into the frequency bandwidth of these entities. These entities jump without parachutes to get into these people and use them as a physical medium with which to mete out havoc and mayhem to society, right? That's why it's the prevalence of crystal meth. But that's just one example. We also have ecstasy. And I've spoken to people who were kingpins, who were leaders in the rave movement, and who know about the New World Order and the reptilian overlordship, and they tell me, yes, absolutely, that ecstasy lowers people's vibrations. It allows all these, and there really are snake entities. Talked earlier about in Stargate SG-1, these physical snake entities burrow into people and take them over. But in an ethereal, metaphysical sense, there are these what appear to be snake entities that like to lodge themselves into people's solar plexus. That's a very common place. But not only take up humans as host, but also other beings. Isn't that interesting? Reptilians, dragons, right? Dragons are real. And these snake entities have taken up a lot of these beings as hosts and used them, for their nefarious purposes. So just to interject just to digress for a second, what I'm finding with people in the healing business is not only are more and more people in need of entity attachment removal and clearing up their auric fields and whatnot, but also entities are showing up to them that want to be divested of a snake entity, for example. And even reptilians, believe it or not, have shown up to these beings. And when I mean show up, either physically, but often is not in another plane, but they're visible to the clairvoyant. And they themselves, these reptilians, have these snake entities, and they ask, and sometimes beseech pleadingly, please get this thing out of me, right? I don't like what they're making me do. I want to be free of this, right? So more and more, and it's not just them, it's other beings too, more and more we're seeing different types of entities that are asking for healings. Isn't that interesting? And I think that in itself is a reflection of this increasing frequency and the ending of this paradigm.
I agree.
So getting back to the psychotronic / psychiatric tyranny, the psychotronics oftentimes work with the electromagnetic beaming and whatnot, work in consonance with the psychotropics and the psychiatric tyranny. Yep. In fact, they're two sides of the same coin, just for all intents and purposes. So we're seeing that play out. And now it's like you're hearing these control freaks saying, we must submit all 5-year-old children to psychiatric evaluations. They want to plug all of them into this, it's not enough they're getting... Yeah, it's not enough they're getting hammered by all these they're getting hammered by these vaccines at a very early age, and who only knows, not besides the mercury and everything in it, but whatever nanobots in these vaccines as well, and children getting hammered by these, dozens of them before they're even 5 years old. So not only is the rave movement been compromised and essentially taken over, but the psychiatric tyranny is reaching further and further down to get more and more kids on Adderall. Adderall is another very big psychiatric drug that's given to teenagers and pre-adolescents increasingly. Ritalin, of course, right? And now they're pushing for mandatory psychiatric evaluations because they want to create, in consonance with the depopulation agenda, whoever's left, they want them to be just drones. And the Common Core is another example of that, right? Right. The Common Core education.
And not to interrupt you, but obviously we're talking about entity control versus mock radio communication system. Now, we all know with psychotronic weapon systems, and we're natural radio transceivers. That's our gift. That's what we all are. We're hosts for that. So it's a matter of tuning into the right frequencies. But I will tell you through psychotronic, and I know psychotronic like the back of my hand, I'll tell you point blank, when people say the voices are saying this and the voices are saying that, I will guarantee you 99.9% most of the time that's a psychotronic drive. And I can really assess those because people used to come to me in the past and I knew exactly what was happening to them. So, this is like I said, it's an epidemic, but they're using things like, a psychiatric evaluation for what, pray tell? I mean, if they're deploying this technology, which I know they're doing across the globe, and they're targeting people, and of course, if they have a lower astral body to begin with or it's shattered, then you have to ask yourself, that's already making them more and more controllable. But if they're fortified in their higher self oversoul, it's a little bit harder. They can't program someone who's already, higher self connected.
Because it's a frequency war. It goes back to that. And that's why it's so important for people to plug in and go within and then activate those ascension codes. And there's other things that one could do. There's practical means. People can listen to the 528 hertz heart center vibe on YouTube. I mean, there's numerous practical methods people can take advantage of to keep their vibe at a high level. And this psychotronic warfare is so prevalent these days. And what people have to understand is virtually any kind of household appliance can be utilized for that purpose because as you know, I mean, also the way that the remote beaming takes place. Is that really the microwave, or is that really the programmable coffee brewer that's talking to the person? Or is it they're being beamed in the head? Or is it a combination of both? Because they've got all bases covered. And
we're electrical
and now
too. So
we're electrical. We're bioelectrical.
we could be hijacked.
We could be hijacked. And nowadays they're putting smart meters in people's homes, and they're basically killing people because of the heart problems they have, and the nausea, and the headaches, and the cancer, and everything else. I mean, it's just all out, full spectrum, frequency warfare. And
I agree.
yes, so that's going on too. And what they're doing also is by remotely beaming these people, they also like to beam the frontal lobe, because the frontal lobe is the impulse control center. And these people may or may not have like a genetic predisposition to impulsive behavior, because whether it's archontic, non-human inspired mind control or strictly human inspired mind control, a lot of it has to do with instilling OCD, obsessive compulsive disorders of varying degrees, whether it's negative thought loops or the self-loathing, hopelessness, that vibe that goes with it, not just the thought stream, but the negative vibe that goes through it along with it. So they intentionally beam the frontal lobe precisely to diminish or completely eradicate any kind of impulse control the person may have. So then when they start beaming all the sadistic imagery into these people and they start installing all these multi-layered programs, right? What you have are people that it's a perfect storm for someone who can be utilized to mete out in mayhem of one sort or another. And it could be seemingly random mayhem, or it could be very surgically directed mayhem against specific targets and whatnot. So the whole psychotropic thing, you're absolutely right about that. I don't know what demographics they look for in particular. I'm sure that there's a genetic, energetic, psychological profile that they look for that for ease, but there's also an overarching umbrella effect where they're just uniformly beaming everybody. And increasingly we're seeing that in the television too, because a lot of my labs, monarchs, people in projects in general, project people I call them, they get very triggered. You talked earlier about the programming of some of these unhealed my labs and super soldiers, where they're programmed to react negatively and get triggered when they're around other my labs and other super soldiers, and so pretty soon they're at each other's necks, and that happens all the time. What they also do is through the TV and cinema and in movies. Increasingly, it's been going on for a while, but certain movies can trigger the hell out of people. I know people that have walked out of the Tom Cruise movie Vanilla Sky just like a basket case, and next thing you know, there's a black helicopter hovering over them in the theater parking lot, right? And in the offshoot to Stargate SG-1 and Stargate Atlantis, Stargate Universe, which is just another one of those Lost in Space clones, right? But it was very militaristic, and it was very in-your-face militaristic, and not only the in-your-face aspect, but what some project people will refer to as subliminals, peppered throughout the whole TV show, which trigger people subjected to certain types of programming, induces anxiety attacks, panic attacks, or sometimes triggers an alter to start pushing its way forward, right? To take over the normal waking consciousness. And the person has to work really hard to push that alter or alters back, right? And, by turning the TV off and taking pain pills or whatever works for them, So it's all across the board now. And now more than ever, we have to remain heart-centered, do whatever it takes to maintain our inner harmony. And if that means detaching from negatively energized people, places, or things, that's what people have to do. And if people are spinning their wheels going to these pointless UFO meetings and all they're talking about is lights in the sky and astronomy and stuff, and just just be kinder to yourselves and just detach from that and work on your healing, and the guidance and the insight will come to you. And
well, I think you use discernment. Once again, discernment is a huge thing. I mean, it's okay to assess things and study, certain anomalies. That's fine. But I think that people get really, obsessed with it sometimes. And like you said, it's all the answers are within. We all know that. And once you start really diving into your own soul's design, your essence of origin, your celestial heritage, you unravel everything at the DNA level. So, all of this is accessible. We just need to learn how to do it. And obviously beings like us do, but many people don't. So they're looking for sounding boards, and I think part of these UFO groups usually do that. But then once again, you're getting triggered. And how many of those UFO anomalies are man-made? How much of that is black ops or the black space program versus a legitimate UFO?
Yeah. There's two sides of that. I do believe that there's more and more legitimate ET activity in our solar system, but I absolutely believe that now what Ben Rich said was earth-shaking about how we can already take ET to the stars. The military already travels. Ben Rich being the late director of the Lockheed Skunk Works. And his mentor was Kelly Johnson, another guy deeply immersed in the back engineering of ET technology. But one thing that did not resonate with me was when Ben Rich said, we have small fleets of these craft that can already travel the stars. And no, by now they have large fleets of these. And some of them are quite large, some of these craft, not quite the scale, the stupendous scale that we see in the deep space imagery. I mean, Iapetus, for example, Saturn's moon, or the moon itself, right? I mean, stupendous in scale, but I don't think not quite there yet, but just on an earthly level, some of them are quite large because electrogravitics, field propulsion being what it is, they can scale these things up, But yes, and that's another reason why people need to be more discerning, because if they're being beamed electromagnetically, and then they're confronted with a man-made craft, I can tell the difference.
I can too.
I just know, and many people I work with know too. But your average person doesn't know, so they either can be made to believe it's an ET craft when it's not, or conversely, someone who bought into all the blue beam stuff and believes that there's absolutely no ETs around, they may be confronted with a real ET craft and think that it's this Project Bluebeam, and you know what I mean. So it runs the gamut, the kind of encounters people could have. But but yes, now they have whole fleets of these, and I think his name was Gary McKittrick, the guy that hacked his way into the all these databases that talked about these secret space fleets and stuff. And yeah, that's just scratching the surface, because McKinnon, I think his name is Gary McKinnon. I may be wrong. But just the testimony that I've gotten from all these different MyLabs and people in different projects that run the gamut, yes, there's off-world installations. There's even installations and bases in other planes of existence. They now know how to carve out niches for themselves in these other dimensions, for lack of a better term, the deep black military in alliance with certain ET groups. And there's different factions of them. There's not all one monolithic group. There's factions within them, and they're all vying for supremacy and for survival. So it's a mixed bag, but it always goes back to discernment, going within, and working. Eventually, the right people. When one begins to exude a certain vibe, eventually the people they need to meet, whether it's someone local or someone on the internet, they will meet those people. And for those of you who've been basically dealing with this alone for some time now, you're not alone. People like Solaris and I, and we know you're out there. We believe in you, and you will eventually find others that you can interact with. But that's not even the half of it, because I know for a fact that a lot of these people that have all these abilities, who have celestial star ancestry, if you will, that some of them in higher planes of existence, in different compartmentalized states of mind, states of being, astral altars, if you will, they're operating not only throughout this cosmos, but in higher planes, and they're working against the Draco Empire. I know that for a fact. They've been described variously as ground crew, as guardians. I mean, there's the different names that people have come up with to describe these types of MILABs. A lot of them are MILABs, not all of them are. So some of these people, for whatever reason, have not been molested by the deep black military on this planet yet. And hopefully, that'll remain the case. But so it's not just that they're being accessed by the negative ETs and the military that work with the negative ETs, but probably because of what they volunteer to do here, and who their celestial star elders are, if you will, in consonance with some of these star elder beings, they're carrying out ops as well. So, and that's good news to me. And there's many people that are aware of this, and I believe for security purposes, a lot of them are not consciously allowed at this point, and maybe that might change in the near future, of knowing who their colleagues are that they're working with in teams.
Right, and James,
it's probably.
I didn't want to interrupt you. We're just ready to wrap this up in about a few minutes here, probably 2 minutes. But I did want you to reference where you're going to be speaking next month, right?
Well, the talk that I'm going to be doing is kind of it's a private internet kind of webcam thing. So it's kind of like a members only thing.
I see. Okay.
But the same person that I know who's running it. So I'll see what I can do about if you're interested, right? I mean, it's pretty much what I just said now.
Okay, so I was just wondering if there's a way for the listeners to contact you, or maybe even connect in with that lecture, if not. But I did want to thank you for being on the show today. It's been a pleasure to have you on. Yeah,
it's been a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, you're just very informative, and really enjoyed listening to you tonight. So if there's anything you want to include or conclude while we wait for the transition here, just want to thank you again, and go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you with that. I just want to make sure we get everything down we needed to.
That's quite all right. The website where you can contact me is the Universal Seduction .com/Bartley. If you just type in James Bartley space + space Universal Seduction, it'll take you right to the site. So in the search engine rather. So yeah, and then feel free, anyone out there, if you're so inclined, to email me, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Right. And are you doing any counseling at all? Yeah, when people feel so inclined, they contact me for a consultation, and there's information on my website about that. They can contact me, and we could try to set something up, right? And so there's a way to do that also. They just got to go to the website. Excellent. Well, it's a busy galactic highway out there, and yeah, it is. You never know where you're going to wind up. Just stay on the higher waves, I'd say, right? Yeah, just ride the crest of that frequency wave that's streaming in. All right, and on that note, we're going to be heading out here. I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. I hope you enjoyed the show. See you next week. Thank you, James. Bye.